to share something about yourself and your work at this time that we're in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I sometimes think there's almost so many things I could share, like dependent on the day, but I'm going to just jump in and say something about my work. So I think in a way, like healing solidarity is kind of one thread or strand, and it's quite a big thread or strand in my work. I think all of my work and kind of bigger than healing solidarity in a way is somehow rooted in the question of how do we reckon with the fact that in ourselves the very same oppressive systems that we passionate about fighting against kind of show up.
Right.
Like, how do we reckon with that? Yeah. And for me, that whole exploration has come out of kind of a personal story of being someone who ran a small international NGO in my sort of late 20s and early 30s, so a decade ago now.
Right.
And got to the point where I realized I was kind of exhausting myself, you know, and I was very, kind of close to burnout. And it was also like a personal time where I was going through a divorce, and so that, you know, there was this kind of moment in my life that I think, you know, happens to a lot of people where everything seems to be up for question and collapse almost. Yeah, a bit like the collective moment we're in now as a whole world, right? But for me, that was like a personal moment that felt like that. Like, I can't do this job anymore. I feel like I'm constantly walking up this really steep hill backwards, and I need to find another way to do life in a way, you know, then something needs to shift, right? And for me, part of that exploration then became, do I want to be in this sector? For a long time, I'd kind of held lots of questions about the way we work, about the way power is distributed, about the way resources are distributed. And I tried to engage previously, even when I was director of that organization, in those conversations, but I'd always felt a bit of dissatisfaction about, I always felt we kind of got stuck in the conversation rather than the doing anything with it a bit too much. And so I kind of was like, should I step out of this sector? Should I do something completely different with my life? And I stepped out a bit, and I became a consultant, and I did some work that came to me and bits of work that I, you know, asked for in mostly around women's rights and philanthropy. And some organizational development work with organizations. And I kept holding some thoughts about how the sector needs to change. And at the same time, kind of was exploring for myself various different modalities around, like, how do I better support myself in my life and in my work, doing quite a lot of dance, doing quite a lot of reflection, doing some coaching training and stuff. So I was also like doing some, which felt kind of separate from the development team. And then eventually I felt these paths kind of coming together, and it was around the realization that I had that very many people in our sector were in that kind of state that I was in, of this is way too much. I've got this massive list, I never get it done, I always feel like I'm never going to get there, and I've got to do it all. And even people who weren't like me, like running a small organization, but are in the midst of big organizations, seem to I interviewed quite a lot of people at one stage, mostly women working in development and humanitarian sector. There were many of them talking about how very much too much they felt they were trying to do. Like, it seemed like it was like a systemic problem. And I started to see this sort of systemic problem of what comes out as busyness and burnout and overwhelm as actually like one of the ways that the oppressive systems kind of show up in us and in our work. I started to see that like this compulsion to do it all was linked to a compulsion that somehow I might be the one that has to do it all. And that was actually linked to the idea that I'm the one with the answers, like me alone. That was somewhere living in me and other people, like, and not to blame people for that, but that this whole idea that we want to do something to help people is often is tied up with an idea that it's got to be us. And therefore I might take on all the things, I might work really late, I might become very kind of almost addicted to an idea that I've got to be the one that does it all. And I was listening to a podcast the other day with a woman called Rachel Maddox. She's not in our sector at all, but she works on trauma-informed coaching practice in the US. And she used this term, and I thought that's the word I've been looking for. She calls it a codependent. She called it being codependent to your calling, by which she meant feeling like you're the one that has to make the thing that you see. It's got to be you. And codependence is a term they use around addiction, where you're like, where you uphold an addict, maybe who's your partner or someone close to you, by always trying to fix that. You know, you're always trying to fix them, and that actually keeps them in the problem. And I feel like when we're codependent to our work and our organizations, we actually, although we feel like we're trying to fix them, we're actually always upholding the way things are. And I feel like we actually have to step back. We have to reflect. We have to have spaces to support ourselves to do things differently, if we're ever going to stop kind of accidentally upholding this system of aid and philanthropy that we know isn't working, that we know isn't focusing on what the people that it's supposedly set up to serve actually want and need, that we know has all these structural problems. I feel like in order to unpick that, we kind of have to step back and say, the ways that I'm working are helping to uphold this system. And so I think what I want people to know about me and my work at this point in my life is that I think what I feel really committed to is creating spaces. And sometimes that's one-to-one with people when I'm working with them in a kind of coaching relationship. And sometimes that's a massive online conference like Healing Solidarity. And sometimes it's facilitating a group. But it's like creating spaces where we can explore how oppressive systems, like I see burnout showing up as a way that we're kind of expending ourselves, but other oppressive systems too, showing up in us and showing up in our work, and creating spaces to explore that so that we can challenge it. Because I think although oppressive systems are clearly much bigger than any individual, I do also think that we have some capacity as individuals, or individuals in community and in organizations and as collectives, to choose in what we do, like each day, whether I'm gonna uphold the system, which might be just working really late, you know, and in a way that's uphold, it's expending myself, it's, you know, it's complying with the system that says most of you have got to work really hard so a few people can benefit. Or am I going to say, no, actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to find another way to do it. I'm going to work with other people in a different way. I'm going to create a very different structure. I'm going to say, actually, no, I can't. I'm not going to do those three things. I'm going to decide not to. I'm going to tell that donor I'm not writing their report. And if you don't, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
It's like those are all the small actions of liberation. They're not going to change the system overnight. But I feel like if we can't take them, if we can't get ourselves into a place where we see these dynamics show up in us, and this applies to, you know, it's really about building feminist practice, and it applies to our work on racial justice. It's not just about burnout, but that's just where the realization came for me very strongly initially. If we can't figure out how to make change happen within ourselves and between us as people in relationship, then I feel like, how can we ever really expect it to happen in the world? And I think when we don't do that reflection between us and for ourselves, then that's where we fall into the ways that, like, the sector has found itself kind of upholding oppressive systems almost by accident. You know, what started off as someone's passionate idea becomes this massive bureaucracy that's professionalized, and that is actually failing to challenge the system anymore. So I feel like we all have to do that. Whatever power we might have in the system is going to vary, but there's something about being in that question of how can I be in a liberatory practice as opposed to one that's perpetuating injustice. And it starts with me and us and all of that.
Wonderful.
There we are.
That's lovely. Wonderful. That was very, very reflective, I think, and very honest. So thank you. You've answered the next question I wanted to ask to some extent in terms of what Healing Solidarity means to you. But as we, initially seen it grow and change over the last couple of years. So maybe you can speak of what Healing Solidarity means to you today, and how you've also, changed some of the ways of working, your own role. That might be nice for us to hear.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, so I feel like, and then I suppose there's one thing I want to say about what's Healing Solidarity and all of that. And I talked about it as a thread, I think. And for me, like, Healing Solidarity is also in maybe what's an even bigger question, which is like, how do we be in solidarity globally at this time? So like, how do I relate to you, where you are in Bombay, Mumbai? How do we relate to each other's struggles and questions around change in the world at this time in a way that is equitable and in a way that feels like solidarity, instead of a way that feels like I might perceive myself to be in some way superior, and I'm the one giving out the money, or I'm the one telling you what to do. Like, how do we actually do that, and how do we do it globally? And I think that should be the central question in aid and development in a way. And of course, there are all kinds of challenges we're trying to meet as we ask that question. But if we're not asking the question of what does more equitable, what does really equitable solidarity look like? And that, if we're not asking ourselves that, I think again we'll always fall back into these dynamics of a kind of charitable model of a powered issue between kind of like people in the global north feeling like in some way they're the ones in charge, and all of that, those dynamics that we know relate back to colonialism and all the things. So I feel like Healing Solidarity for me is really, it's kind of like in that question of what does a solidarity that can heal injustice instead of perpetuate it look like. And so once we're in that question, then all the things that we're now doing in Healing Solidarity become really pertinent. Like, what are the practices? What are the different ways of working? What are the things we need to bring in? The skill sets that Jennifer talks about, like, what are the skill sets in our sector that are missing? You know, where's the political courage and humility, and where's the creativity, where's the, you know, where are the things that we've kind of suppressed in favor of this professional bureaucracy that so seems to plague like the kind of very mainstream NGO sector. And so so that's the kind of question for me. And then the way of doing it, so the initial way of doing Healing Solidarity was, I just had an idea that I wanted to create conversations around these topics, and it was very much like a bit of an individual thing. Like, I'm going to interview some people and put them out. And then I was surprised and encouraged by how many people were interested in those conversations the first time in 2018. And last year tried to bring a bit more of an energy of having a couple of other people do interviews, and like it not being so much like, here's Marianne interviewing some people. But I'm really excited that this year it's now moving into being a collectively held project with you and with the others, and that feels critical to me in terms of, you know, the answer to these big questions that I'm asking. And I know they're really big questions, but the answers are not, I don't think anyone's got those answers. I don't think we can come up with like a prototype or a solution or a fix. And I actually think our sector has way too much of that. You know, here's a model, here's a fix, here's a, you know, I don't think that's the problem, part of the problem. And I think the solutions can only be developed together. And as you said, you know, co-creation, having different people's ideas and voices, you know, it's important in Healing Solidarity, not just because it's fun and juicy and feels great, but also because that's important in the world, and it's important that we model that in the project, because actually that's what we want to invite in the sector, I think. So I feel really excited, and now it feels to me like, oh right, I just kind of got this seed from somewhere of this idea, and I sort of planted it the first year, and I was shocked that it grew. You know how sometimes when you plant a plant and you're like, and sometimes they kind of just wither, But this one grew, and it kind of grew, and it had way more stuff on it than I thought, and I didn't almost do that much. It's like when you just, a tomato or a strawberry plant just goes wild and you don't know why. And now I'm like, oh, we can plant a whole, you know, we can plant more. You know, it was just a seed. And if I, you know, give out the seeds or let people bring theirs, or I think maybe it's let people bring theirs and we kind of do them together in some kind of collective garden, then it'll be all the richer and all the more powerful. So yeah, I feel really excited.
Yeah, no, that's so inspiring. That's really nice to hear you say that. And I think you throw open a lot of you really throw it open for everyone to participate and join in. So I think everybody will be very eager to hear it from the initiator and how it's opening up and how you're really looking to take this ahead. So yeah, very inspiring. Nice.
Well,
I like the plant, the seed metaphor. I think that's so powerful.
I think I want to add one more thing about that, and that's that it's lovely bringing all those plants to the garden, but just taking the metaphor a bit further, it isn't always the easiest thing to do. So like what sometimes feels easier is just to keep planting your own seed, and I think we see that a lot in the sector. And like it might be slower when you bring in other people. There might be more to talk about. It might take more time. There might be conflict. There might be disagreement. That all of those things are important, and that's where it's like the practice matters because we're doing it together, you know. And so actually, all of that's part of it. And so it might seem, and I'm not saying it has actually felt great to me this year to be working with you all, but I know that, you know, the easy thing to do is just to sort of do it yourself. You know, we all know that, and it comes up in organizations too, right? We'll just do it our way. But that's where we get to, like, you know, this kind of individualistic or even organizational kind of superiority thinking. And I think, you know, you've said it and lots of others have said it in different ways in this conference. We've got to break that down, because that again is part of what we're trying to fight against.
No, but I think that's very nice of you to share so openly, because I think it's important for all of us to realize that it's okay to feel that it could have been faster had we done it ourselves. But like you said, there is a value in that, and you know, are we going to walk down that path? So,
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with all of us. Thanks,
asking.
Marianne. That was lovely. Yeah.
When I started Healing Solidarity, I had no funding for this project, and I didn't know if anyone would listen to the first conversations that I recorded. At the beginning of 2020, I brought together the advisory circle, and they've been helping me to begin to transform this project into something that can be collectively held and run. We want to bring in people who can support the work of our online space and events, both during this annual conference and throughout the year, providing healing and reflective spaces for those who are committed to reimagining international development. And to do that, we need your help. We hope that this conference and our online space feels like a place that you can belong in all your questions, in your own need to heal, in your anger about injustice, and in your passion for change. And we want to meet you there more resourcefully, offer you more, create some of the amazing ideas that some of you have shared with us over the past few years. Please consider joining us this year as a sustaining member of Healing Solidarity. We'd love to have you as a part of that in the coming year.